Welcome to the Humans of Fintech podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Casperson. And trust me when I say today's guest is someone you're going to want to pay attention to. Meet Frances Zelazny, the founder and CEO of Anonybit. This woman is out here changing the entire game when it comes to digital privacy and biometric security for financial services. We're talking next level tech, but with one main goal: protecting your data in ways you never thought possible. Frances is the visionary behind Anonybit, a company that's flipping the script on how we secure our online identities. And she's not just playing in the sandbox. She's building a whole new playground for privacy, security, and authentication. We're talking advanced biometrics, digital trust, and why the future of fintech is all about keeping your data safe without sacrificing privacy and efficiency. Now, in this episode, we'll get into the nitty gritty of Frances's journey, how she went from startup idea to CEO, and why she's a total powerhouse in the world of cybersecurity. So, grab your coffee, get comfy, and let's dive into this conversation with one of the most exciting voices in fintech today. Let's get into it. All right. Well, while you were doing that, everyone, welcome to the Humans of Fintech podcast. I'm so excited to be back at Money 2020 live. I was here last year, the year before. I've podcasted in Amsterdam. It's always a treat to be here. How many Money 2020s have you been to, Frances?
I think I've lost count at this point. I don't know. But I've done Amsterdam. I've been
Nice.
here. Yes, it's been a while.
It's I see. It's the end of the day, so I'm imagining Frances is at least, 40 meetings in. She's somehow time traveled a few times and been all over Vegas at this point, right? Is that about accurate?
Yes, I think I did about 21,000 steps yesterday, and I didn't even look at what I did today. So it's very good for the calories.
Very good to get your steps in. All right. Well, I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for joining me. And for some context, in case you don't know, I did write a book this year. It's called Fintech Feminists. And it's a huge reason why I needed to take a little break from the podcast. And now I'm officially back now that my book is out. And in case you don't know, Frances Zelazny here, our guest, is in the book. Chapter 7 specifically. Did you read your section yet?
I did.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how you took a 1-hour conversation and turned it into that. I'm still so impressed.
It's a part of the job, I'm excited to dive into that. So let's go ahead and get into it. First and foremost, I want to talk a bit about your journey, your personal story, and how the influences of your upbringing have kind of brought you here today and helped you see identity as your eventual career purpose. But we can start with just what made you so passionate about identity to begin with?
So identity was always figured into who I am, who I was. And it was always framed to me that you need to know where you came from in order to know where you're going. So for those who don't know, probably a lot of listeners don't know, my mother is actually from Cuba, and my father is a Holocaust survivor. And both of them had very distinct journeys in their childhood and their upbringing that figured into my whole life. A Holocaust survivor has a lot of implications, a lot of things that come with that tag. Not only how a family could make it through something like that, how they survive, but also like the aftermath of that and the impact of that on who they are, how they see the world, how they treat people, how they view opportunities that are available or not available to them just by virtue of who they are. And similarly, my mother's journey in Cuba was similar, and not, I mean, very, very different, but similar from an identity point of view, like who left, who stayed when Castro came, and what those experiences, and how those experiences shaped them into like how they view the world and what opportunities they had and where they would go. And we don't really have time to get into all of it, but it was just very interesting where people went to when they escaped, why they went where they went, and a lot of it had to do with their identities. So, just as a person, having nothing to do with career, identity was like I was like always this mixed person. Like people are like, what nationality do you identify with? What ethnic group? What religious group? Like all that stuff, right? Like so, and just because I come from a mixed background, I always had an appreciation for different people and a passion for how different people lived and what was important to them and cultural values and things like that. So I guess that I didn't think about all of this until really I got into the world of identity. And then I was like, oh, this is so me.
Well, I think, and as a mixed race person as well, with a mother from the Philippines and a father from Los Angeles of Norwegian descent, I fundamentally resonate with this, and something that I have grown to appreciate about people like us is that we really are bridges, right? Because of our mixed identities, we're able to see things that, not everyone can. We're seeing two sides of the world from both of our parents. And then as a child, you can take those lessons, right, into adulthood, and they kind of open up a third eye, if you will, right? Like a level of experience that is really unique to us. And then you're able to use that to be able to find unique solutions to massive problems in the world, like you have possibly the largest problem in our financial services industry. And before we do get into fraud and what you've built here, I do want to talk through a bit of your kind of winding career path, because identity was always such a big part of your upbringing, and in the book you talk about that being like a conversation at the dinner table, right? And your parents feeling very grounded and strong in their identities, coming from such different backgrounds but still had those parallels. But you had this like winding career journey to get to this point, and I think that's important because nothing is linear, especially not success.
That's for sure. So because of my upbringing, I was always interested in other cultures, and I really wanted to go into foreign policy, actually.
Yeah.
And travel the world and like take all of the perceptions that I had and like do something with it, make the world a better place, if you will.
Yeah.
And so as we talked about in the book, my very first job or internship was at the UN, and it was a very different place then, I guess, a lot less polarized. And it was a college internship, and I thought I was like a real big shot because I put on a suit and I got a pass into the building, and I would just hang out at the delegates' dining room with all these, heads of state and
Very
ambassadors,
cool.
And I thought this was it. And it was really, really fascinating to see also, like, even in the confines of the UN, how there was like almost like a tiered system. Certain countries and how like people interacted, who they interacted with, and it was just really, really fascinating. The project that I got assigned to was sustainable development, which is still very relevant to today, climate change and all of that. And it was like an introduction into, how impact of something in one part of the world can affect another part of the world, right? And we see that today. This has nothing to do with identity, but but it was very much like a reality that we do live with now.
Well, you were connecting the dots, right? Like it was the fact that you were in a place. I mean, to have your first entrance into the workforce be at the UN is very cool. I will say, like that. I wish that was what was on my resume. That is very cool. But and to have kind of the intuition, if you will, right, to say, okay, like so much of what is going on in our world is interconnected. Yeah, that can take people a lifetime before they realize something like that. It's what, for me, I love about fintech. It's why I just dedicate my reporting to fintech, is the fact that this is all of this, like this, we're surrounded by all these fintech companies and all these financial services, and it is all interconnected, right? It's like fintech is the tool that enables all of these transactions to happen and all of the connectivity to happen by way of largely our cell phones, right? It is a connector ultimately, but then beneath that surface there are the challenges, right? Like the things that we have to work through, which kind of brings me to your career path from, this from finance into biometrics. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about the aha moment that you had when you realized that facial recognition, biometrics, could be a thing, because you knew about it and learned about it well before, today we're all much more familiar with it because we all open up our iPhones with our faces. But talk to us about how you were introduced to it.
So it
Early
was really by accident. Talk
Yeah.
about nonlinear paths.
Yeah.
Like we really don't know what, where we will end up. I actually tell my daughter, I'm like, it doesn't really matter what you're going to do in 50 years. Just two things: pick something you love and pick something you're good at.
Yeah.
And then the path will take you there. So that's been my motto. So my first job out of school was actually with a startup company in financial services, simply because my parents didn't want me to. I graduated early, and my parents didn't want me to sit at home and do nothing for 6 months. So I just got a job, any job, but that job was in financial services, and it was also a startup company within a larger company. So I actually got to be exposed to the business world really by accident. And one thing led to another. I left there. I ended up doing my graduate work at night. And then a friend of mine one day was recruiting for a startup facial recognition company. So I think you'll be interested in this. And literally, I just fell in love immediately with the subject. I felt like it was nobody knew what facial recognition was at the time.
What year?
99.
Okay. Yeah, no one knew.
No one knew. In fact, I don't know if I told you the story about when we were talking about the book, but at the company at the time had a shrink wrap product. I don't even know if people know what shrink wrap is today, but it was a piece of software on a disk inside a box that was shrink wrapped with plastic, and it was called Face It PC. And we sold it. We won Best of Show at a trade show like this.
Wow.
And somebody called the office one day and said, I enrolled my cat, and now I can't get in. And we're like, this is not cat recognition, it's face recognition. It's like for humans. That's how early we were into this thing. But I just realized right away, and it was not even a question, that facial recognition had such a potential to drive inclusion, to create opportunities around just like new things, new ideas. And most intellectually interesting to me is that it had a policy angle. Like it wasn't just something that, we're going to sell and make a lot of money, but it was something that had a responsible use framework around it. And that, like putting the two together, really lit me up.
Well, to go back to you wanting to do foreign policy at some point, right? So then you found your sweet spot, but it would take you a second, right, before you would find maybe that entrepreneurial spark, if you will.
So I was very fortunate to be part of this startup. Ended up becoming what is today like one of the biggest companies in identity. We were involved in every single aspect. And it was really exciting to grow something. I was like number 18 by the time I left. I think we were 2,500 people. It was really, really an amazing journey. And we touched on a lot of programs. And then I left and I did some consulting and I worked with a bunch of startups. And I was asked a few times if I would want to lead a company, and I declined actually multiple times because I needed, if I was going to make the move, it had to be something that I could get behind and that I was, really, really passionate about. And so it took time to get there.
Yeah. So then between you finding your kind of passion for biometrics and identity, and then finally kind of landing on this is a solution to one of the biggest problems in society today, which is fraud. It's like, how was that jump? You did how many more jobs until, right? Like,
so that company, my stint in that startup, that first biometric startup, was 13 years. And then when I left, I was consulting. I got involved with payments. And then I discovered the world of fraud, because if you're in payments, and I was like, I don't understand what is going on here. How can I take somebody's credit card, put it in, this was the beginning of Apple Pay. How can I take somebody's credit card and put it into my phone and make a payment and nobody knows that it's not my credit card?
Yeah.
Like, how is that possible? How are we as a society accepting that? And I was just like, part of me was horrified. It's like, this is the beginning of mobile payment, and this is what we're allowing people to do. This is wrong. And then I joined, then I ended up with a fraud prevention company that was super successful, also a startup scale-up that is today a unicorn, BioCatch. And it's just like the same thing. I just kept on thinking like, okay, this is super cool technology, super interesting, but why are we chasing fraudsters all day long? Shouldn't we be able to know that Nicole is Nicole and Frances is Frances when we're transacting? And until we do that, we're just going to keep on in the hole that we're with fraud. And now it's a crisis.
Well, and that's one of my favorite reasons to talk about fraud, because as a reporter and editor journalist in my career, it's not always the sexiest topic. It's not always the shiny thing people want to talk about. It is a massive problem that just continues to grow the more our digital footprints grow. So I guess to start to talk about fraud, what is your consensus for how good we are doing now? Like, fraud is growing. Are we doing a better job than before at combating it, given that we have more technology, with this weird element of also, because there's more technology, there's more advanced fraudsters? Like, what is your current state of the union on the market right now?
So I think we're really in a crisis situation. Okay. There is not one day that goes by that I don't talk to somebody, and I'm sure you're hearing it too from people, that they were not a victim of a fraud, or they don't know somebody who was a victim of a fraud, or they're afraid that there's a scam, and it's just getting worse and worse every day. And for those that think fraud is not a sexy topic, when companies are having to shut down their operations for days on end because they were hacked, and now they can't even service their customers,
which we've seen this year.
Yes. I think that's even less sexy than talking about fraud and dealing with the problem. And I think that the state of the union around this really just boils down to a couple of key points. Number one, that we have personal data that is stored and kept in these honeypots that are just impossible to protect, and it's very lucrative for fraudsters to steal that data, so they will just continue doing it no matter what you try to put in their way. We allow the use of that data to verify our identities. Fraudsters use that stolen data to create synthetic identities. So even KYC processes that maybe were airtight 10 years ago, today are being circumvented. And within organizations, all these processes are siloed. So whoever did the KYC is not responsible for authentication, and then you call the call center to recover your account. And what do? They ask you, like, what's your mother's maiden name? What did your dog have for breakfast? Like, what is that? Like, we're so, like, we need to get so far away from that.
Yeah.
And biometrics are really the only way to do that. But people are afraid of biometrics.
Right.
And here we are.
Yeah. So then how do we combat the fact that biometrics is a solution, but people are afraid of it?
So this goes to the core of Anonybit.
Yes.
This is really why we built this company and why I decided to take this on, my entrepreneurial.
Yes.
This was the why
Awakening.
Anonybit, why now? Why Anonybit, why now? Because I felt that we finally have a solution, a capability that can address fraud at the core, not for a specific use case in a particular point in time, but something that could thread the entire user journey, could handle not just biometrics, but any kind of PII. So a lot of banks and fintechs by regulation have to store document scans, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Those document scans are loaded with PII. So if that document scan repository gets hacked into, then all of the data associated with that is also now compromised. So there are a lot of aspects of fraud prevention and identity management that come together under the rubric of Anonybit, from biometric authentication to blocklisting, velocity checks, and data and personal secure data management, all in a privacy by design framework, basically taking away the excuse of no biometrics. So now there's no excuses. And we know how to manage the data safely and securely, preventing data breaches, and really getting at the root of, where you name the chapter, the root of the problem.
Right. Well, and then the other element of that chapter was no more Band-Aids, right? We tend to be, as an industry, very reactive instead of proactive, especially when it comes to fraud or any crises, right? We tend to only pay attention to something if there's a fire that needs to be extinguished. And something that I learned, one thing I love about what you've built with Anonybit and your story is that you're weaving together the experiences of your past to help solve a problem for the future, right? To help solve for policy, to help solve for these for gaps in data and innovation that fundamentally hurt people, right? Like at the end of the day, right? It's easy to think of it as just like, oh, millions of people were frauded or are locked out of their bank accounts. This number, this is my number. But at the end of the day, those are people. Those are people that are losing their livelihoods. Those are people that are losing their savings. There's people that are losing the things that they've worked so hard for. And we don't. I think sometimes, especially we're at Money 2020, we're always thinking about the numbers. Like, do we always think about this is humans of fintech? Do we always think about the human behind it? And the reason I shared that is because in my research after hearing your story and hearing how you've decided to come up with this full circle solution that isn't just silos or solves only one problem, but solves the fundamental issue of the whole thing, I had researched and come to learn that is actually an incredibly unique characteristic typically found in female leaders, right? Typically found in women like us who have had these, multicultural, even multi-generational experiences throughout our careers. And I thought that was just fascinating that's like a characteristic within us. It makes us so, ripe and poised to be the leaders, to be able to solve the root of the problem, which is why I named it that.
So there's actually something interesting also about female leaders, but I want to go back to the Band-Aids also. So I read something super interesting, that there's something about female leaders that are more, it's not about, they don't need as many people, they need passionate people. So part of the reason that a lot of women-owned businesses are maybe more profitable, more successful, is that they're not trying to build the biggest teams, they're trying to build the most passionate teams that are going after solving the problem. And I think that is definitely reflecting what we're doing at Anonybit, and also reflects a lot of the culture and the values that we have at our company. But back to the Band-Aids, because I think we really are are looking to solve a lot of the problems with Band-Aids. A lot of people here are like, oh, well, we use biometrics, we use the Face ID on the phone, and that's all great. But at the end of the day, again, just like I said, I could take your credit card, put it in my phone, and nobody will ever know that it's not my credit card, even if I use my Apple Pay, because this is really convenience. This is a Band-Aid from a security standpoint. The way to really manage identity and really close the loop is to have some kind of a root of trust or a source that can be tapped into or invoked, whether you are trying to make a payment, you want to add a payee, you want to get a new SIM card, and these Band-Aids are really causing nightmares to people. So not only can you not know who somebody is, you also can't know who somebody is not. So I have a friend who had, it was a crazy story, had a Zelle fraud on his, somebody did a Zelle fraud, and he went to the bank, and the bank said, it was you. And he said, it really wasn't me, I wasn't home. And they said, it was you, it was your computer, it was your IP address, and it was you had the proper login, it was your password, it was you. And he said, I have proof that I wasn't home. I am a real estate broker. I was with a client. So I have the person who could say that I was with them at
I've got a
another
whole
address.
alibi, bank.
And my car was at a parking garage somewhere else downtown, and they said, nope. According to the rules that we've set in our fraud stack, its device, its location, and it's the password, and it was you. How is he supposed to go now and prove that it wasn't him? He's out $6,000.
And the bank is doing diddly squat to help?
Well, so they offered to settle. He sued them, and they're like still, trying to figure it out. But then, so he's in the middle of his thing, and then the other, because he knows that I'm in this space, so then he forwarded me an article, and he's like, look, same thing happened to this other person. Yeah. And I think this is all part of the problem, because we don't really know. We don't know who we're really dealing with when we put all these Band-Aids in place. So even if you have like a passwordless solution on the desktop, if you allow people to transact from another channel in another way using weak authenticators, that's where the fraudsters are going to go.
Yeah. In the book you shared an example a bit about how like Anonybit will work or does work. Can you reshare? I mean, it might not be the exact one. You used me as an example, I believe. But like, give us an example exactly of how what you've built helps these issues, because I mean, there are multiple layers to this, right? But with what you've built, you're tackling essentially them all, or at least at the root. So tell us mere mortals who are not totally equipped on the happenings of biometric.
So
give it to me simple.
So typically with biometrics, you're just comparing. You with biometrics, you take an image, and then that image gets converted into what is called a template. And when you do Face ID, the template is on the phone, and the template is what gets compared when you take your picture, and then the signal goes from the phone to wherever to say like, oh, somebody unlocked the phone. And because of all the data breaches and because people are so afraid of biometrics, the question became like, well, how can we do something different with these templates so we can use them as a single source of truth at the root of trust? And so the concept is get rid of the idea of the template altogether. Take the template and shard it, break it up like glass. So shards of glass, you can't put it back together again. Once it gets broken down, it's done. So that's what we do with the biometric template. We take it and we shard it. And we split it up into any number of pieces. Let's just say 10 pieces for the example. And we distribute these pieces into a different cloud. And then when we want to authenticate you, we break it up again, and we compare the new piece against its stored counterpart. And we do these calculations or these comparisons in parallel. And that's actually what we use to authenticate you. So you can never put these shards back together again. You can never reverse engineer these shards into the template or the original image. Once it's broken, it's broken. And that's the whole privacy framework for what we built and why we are able to make banks and fintechs and other regulated industries feel more comfortable with using biometrics and getting to the root. So now that you've solved this problem, now you can
Ripple effect.
It's the ripple effect, exactly. So now you have this single source of truth. Now I can use that to prevent somebody from coming back. I can make sure that you are who you claim to be when you want to send $1,000 or whatever, make a payment, when you call the call center. And I can do this with your selfie, I can do this with your voice, I can do this with your palm, and now it doesn't really matter what biometric. This is the core framework.
Right. And with the example you used earlier too, had this bank had this solution of yours, that person, that customer who lost $6,000, would have had a much more viable way, a real way to have identified that it really wasn't him, right? Like that, which is the whole point. Because from a financial inclusion standpoint, I've wanted to swear so many times since we've been talking, but like, it's messed up, right? Like from my purview, it's like, how dare a bank not give someone the money that they're owed? But I get it, like it's like, they sign on the dotted line in the little, in the terms and agreements that this is how it goes. So but it's messed up.
It's very messed up. Actually, if you, I don't know if you listened to the Zell hearings, but that was the core of a lot of the questions. Like the senators were asking, how come you cannot return people the money?
Yeah.
And without saying it, what they really said was, because we really can't tell if it's the right person, or if somebody did something and then they regretted it, or if it was a fraudster. So identity is really at the core of all of this. So in this case, two things. First of all, the fraudster wouldn't have been able to send the $6,000 because it would have just been, they wouldn't have been able to authenticate. But when somebody, like in the first party fraud situation, if you did use a biometric to sign the transaction, then the transaction would have gone through and you would have a biometric audit trail that says, yes, Frances is the one that authorized this transaction. So think about it, no chargebacks, no first party fraud, all of these, so many of these things would just go away if we properly authenticated people.
I mean, something, with our last few minutes left, something that really sticks out to me with what you've built, with what a lot of the women also featured in the book have done. And I think as I've reread my own book, as I've kind of reflected on it more, and people always ask me, what is the through line? What is the one common thread with all the women in the book? And I'm realizing it's that they questioned the system instead of themselves, right? They have this intuition. They see the root of the problem so deeply. And you said it earlier, right? It's instead of being like, oh, well, that's just the way things are and that's just the way this is, let's try to build solutions on top of it. How do we instead think about getting beneath it or questioning the system entirely, or how things have been traditionally entirely, right? You're like, okay, well, this is how identity and fraud has been this whole time. Let's not even think about putting those, these pieces back together and write a whole new version of the pieces. And I think that is such an important element of being an entrepreneur. And which is really one of my last questions for you, which is to, maybe close us out with some of your key pieces of advice, because you've been on this journey. How old is Anonabit now?
We're a few years old.
Yeah. And, but it's, you've been in the industry for how long?
25 years.
25
years? You're trying to age me?
I'm just multi-generational, okay? We learn from each other. But no, I mean, but you've been in the industry a while, you're on your entrepreneurial journey. You're kicking ass and taking names. What is some of the, I don't know, I guess pieces of advice you would have? Because when you're solving for the root of problems, it can be hard for people to hear you.
Yeah, so I think for any entrepreneur, you need to really have conviction. Conviction of the problem more even than the solution. Because if you have good people around you and you're really smart and you know the space, then you can always adjust the solution, but you really have to believe in the problem. And you really have to believe in, like really understand the problem deeply. And then from there, you can ideate around the solution. So I would say that's number one. And I remember very early on, and the person is here, he might be listening, but when I first launched Anonybit, somebody I really, really respect came to me and was like, Frances, I don't get it. It's like, what? I don't get it. Like, do people really care about privacy? He's like, and this is somebody who I really hold in very, very high regard. He's like, I don't get it. And I said, it's very hard until you like really start talking to people and peel back the layers one by one and find out why, really why they're not doing something differently. And couple of years later, he called me up and he said, you were right, here we are. Big companies, very, very big companies are talking about identity in a privacy preserving way, and your time is here. And so, you really, really need to have conviction. So that's number one. And that will drive everything because, it's very hard to be an entrepreneur. It's very hard to...
I know it.
Yeah. So, like, there's something that keeps you going every single day. And that's, again, the drive of, like, there is a problem to be solved, and you're somehow uniquely positioned to solve that problem. And for me, I felt like I was uniquely positioned because I had been in this space for so long. And I understood the technology, and I understood the problem, and I understood, like, the, how customers are buying, and I also the policy and the regulatory aspects. So I think that puts me in a very unique situation. But it's not easy.
It's not.
At all.
At all.
The roller coasters are crazy.
They are.
Lots of ups and lots of downs, but somewhere in all of this, there is the satisfaction that, for me at least, that I am getting to the root of the problem. And as, now that we're in production, we're working at scale, we have, big banks that are customers and fintechs that are, working with us, and we are able to secure more and more user journeys and drive inclusion and possibilities, not just in the US, by the way, but in many parts of the world. It really, like, it's really satisfying, and we're just beginning. Like, it's just the beginning, and yet it is so satisfying.
Yeah, no, it's all about the journey, right? And you can't wait to have fun, throughout the journey of it, because as my co-founder always likes to tell me, the top of every mountain is just the bottom of the next. And I think that's a great way to... That is a great way to put it. A great way to put entrepreneurship, because you're always going to be hitting the next thing and then the next pit and the next high, and it's intense. But no, I'm so excited for what you've done. I'm so excited for people to be able to read your story in my book. They got a little taste today. Yeah, but thank you so much, Frances, for joining me and for all of the insight. And thank you. Obviously, the theme of this podcast has been getting to the root of problems. So thank you so much for using your vision and your experiences to do so. Thank you. Yeah. All right, we got a round of applause from our silent disco audience behind us.
Okay, I can't see.
Yeah, you can't see. But that is a wrap. Thank you all so much for being here. Woo! Are you ready to sign some books?
Let's go.
Let's do it. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Humans of Fintech. If you loved it, be sure to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.